Hello there. Welcome. Let me just adjust this guy. Sorry about that. Cut that from the video. I don't have an editor. Anyway, welcome to my second review of a very special book series that I call The Dark Tower. Well, I don't call it. Stephen King calls it. I don't know what I am. So, before we start this review, there's something I wanted to put down on the table. And one of them is being, well, frankly, I love this series from bottom to start. I started reading it when I was right around the time of 11th grade. By that time, I had started my path on writing animated stories, most of them terrible, on, horror and fantasy, those being my favorite genres. Around that time, I had started collecting books by Stephen King, something that I'm really glad about. But the first book that I ever read from him was a book called The Gunslinger. And from there, well, actually, it was the first book that I ever read, but the first book of the Dark Tower series I ever had was an old edition of The Wastelands. And I don't have that anymore, which is frankly something that haunts me, because it was a really good old edition, and if anyone knows me personally, they know I love hoarding those very good, very old editions. Now, I've had this old edition right around 8th or 9th grade when my mom brought it from a thrift store after I was starting to get into the whole reading thing. By then, I was like, oh, it's Wasteland, Stephen King. Who's this? Stephen King is like this amazing author. He's done all these books. And by 8th or 9th grade, I really didn't know about Stephen King. But as soon as I got that book, I realized, oh, this is the third one. And I really don't, anyone doesn't like starting from the middle. So, by then, I had started researching what the Dark Tower series was, and what kind of books they had. And to me, it seemed like right up my fucking alley. It sounded like this weird fucking adventure that it was just taking across all different lands. I love fantasy a lot, and I love the adventure stories that I read from certain fantasy authors. Rick Riordan is better than Harry Potter. Okay. And personally, I found the Dark Tower series to be one of my favorite stories. But I'm rambling. Now, let's get on with this review. The Gunslinger as a whole is a good book, but it has some issues that kind of infect it throughout its 200, 300 plus pages. I've had many issues with the book, don't get me wrong, and there are consistencies that are made that don't quite feel right, but I'll get to that once I can. The book revolves around a handful of characters. The main character of this title, Roland Deschain, the Gunslinger, a title that holds more to it as you learn what you have to go through to even get to this status. The Man in Black, an evil priest/sorcerer that literally just wants to mess with the main character as much as he can while also serving a bigger, more vague purpose. It's not really revealed in this book. And Jake Chambers, a young boy transported into Roland's world in a way that is later to be a really violent way. It's really graphic. Now, the whole point of this book is that Roland is chasing the Man in Black and the famous words of the Man in Black fled into the desert and the Gunslinger followed. Those are the famous words that everyone repeats whenever they talk about Stephen King. Now, the plot summary, I'll summarize it as best as I can. Roland Deschain, after the fall of his hometown, tries to follow the Man in Black and get some answers. He doesn't know whether he wants to kill him or not, but he knows he just has to catch him. He goes through different towns, different areas, and finds that the Man in Black has left traps, and all of them. He manages to find a oasis, and in there he meets Jake Chambers, and with that, they both team up to try to travel amongst his land, as Jake Chambers doesn't really have any other place to go and decides to cling to Roland. They form this sort of father-son relationship, and as the story goes on, they both encounter different situations. They talk to each other, they explain to each other what different worlds they're from, and they try to just make the best of everything, while also Roland is trying to achieve his goal. And The way that Roland achieves his goal might be more darker than most main protagonist heroes might want to go there. He might not even be a great guy. Roland Deschain is more morally gray, as if anything. Now, that's the whole plot. That's the whole shtick of the whole thing. It's just that Roland is chasing the man in black, but the many traps and many situations that they put in is what makes the book interesting. Now, there are other characters, but the minor characters serve only like an artificial sense of progression. They're only used to move the plot along and don't really have any real impact on the story. Though they do give it some flavor, makes the experience more enjoyable and believable, and you get your due sense of adventure from it. Now, the world is fantastic. Atmosphere and imagery can be seen vividly, most of the time at least, as the book gives you these nice pictures and images that can play out like an old Western movie and a dark boot camp-like experience. That, if you ever read the book, you'll get what I mean. There are segments where Roland goes back into his memories, and the way he achieves of being a gunslinger is by going to these year-long boot camps from ages 10 to ages 16, or maybe even beyond that, to just achieve even being called a gunslinger. And to achieve your guns, you have to wait even longer. Now, there are issues, of course, that I have for this novel, and one of them being the fact that it can enter into a difficult way of understanding what the writer is trying to say, and some descriptions can be very hard to understand. You'd most likely need to reread a paragraph or two to understand what you just read. It's written in this sort of dry form, as if it's trying to do this elevated type of heightened writing, and you can feel that, and you get a sense of that feeling, and it's just, you can't really connect it some of the time, and you really aren't getting what Stephen King is trying to describe in this book. The characters, on the other hand, seem to take on a different role. As you read on, the imagery and the flavor of words can flow and mean something and can take you somewhere in that universe, but when it comes to the characters themselves, you can kind of feel that they're lacking a sense of personality, or sometimes any emotion. Through cracks, personality can come in through the broad blankness, and you can find some sort of tragedy in them, especially Roland. Oh boy, does that kid go through a fucking time. Oh man. I don't know if it was on purpose or a byproduct of King's writing style, but the main character, Roland Deschain, suffers from this lack of personality. Though there are times where I felt that he did have something to add every once in a while. That's the issue with the book. If you're reading and following a man who kind of is a plank of wood, but also is a plank of wood with a gun, you aren't gonna really relate to him. It does get better with the introduction of Jake Chambers, perhaps mainly because it gives Roland a person to be around and bounce off of. We can get glimpses of a fatherly figure and see Roland trying to protect the boy, but there arrives another issue. Jake Chambers is a young boy from a far-off place in New York, from a different dimension. The way that he travels into Roland's parallel dimension is by being pushed in front of a car and dying in a very detailed way. Just the way King wants you to eat that good old breakfast in the morning. Nothing like a broken spine and shattered genitals. It's kind of messed up, but as we go on, the real sad thing about it is that Jake seems to only be a blank slate, or to be this type of character that doesn't really feel like they're there. I mean, he has stuff to say and he does add the value of like bigger stakes to the story, so Roland does have someone to protect other than himself, but the problem is the fact that Jake just seems to be completely too smart. In this first book, when you first meet Jake, he just seems to be too smart for a 10 or 11-year-old, and to really be this more emotionally adjusted. Maybe I'm giving kids too much, not too much credit here. But let's be honest, if you're fucking stuck inside of a parallel dimension and you were just ran over by a car and you started forgetting everything, I don't think you'd still be as logical as Jake Chambers would be in this book. Now, the problem that does cover the story is the fact that the connections between Roland and Jake can also feel a little weak and even rushed, if I'm perfectly honest. Now, the timeline does span over days or weeks, but they make a point, or King makes a point, that time is kind of irrelevant in this book, and that it doesn't really matter how many days has passed. It all just feels like a singular day and a singular night, and like that, I feel that is a very cool, interesting aspect of the book. But then again, the progression and pacing can also feel a little off, because they just go from place to place to place to place to place. It's just kind of non-stop action, and there does need to be a break that needs to intersect these segments, because if you're just reading and you would feel, I felt exhausted after reading this. I personally did not read it. I actually ordered an audiobook. I did first read it when I was in 9th or 11th grade, and I finished it. I did like it, but I didn't really get a sense of the critiquing. I just liked it because it was weird and crazy. But now I'm older, I know how to sense a book, and I can tell you, you kind of need some segments where there's breathing time instead of more story time. You know, have some segments where they're going for water or fishing, or even a calm segment. Give some personality to them. I know it's just one big race and they can't waste time, but Jesus Christ, King, at least have your characters eat a fucking burger or something. At least have Jake Chambers enjoy a burger or something. They do eat, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it just feels like, okay, yep, we're sitting down. Oh, we're going on a fucking high-speed car chase in a cave with a bunch of different fucking monsters behind us. Ah, Jesus Christ, they're gonna kill us all. Anyway, now, the last character, the Man in Black. Now, I'm gonna be honest, he's kind of the star of the show. He's barely in it, but he is most certainly the star. At almost all turns, you're going to have to wonder, did Man in Black do that? Did he do that to screw with Roland? It gives the story that urgency and need to find him, because yes, he is an evil man, and he does need to be stopped, because he does everything in his power to make sure Roland is messed up, to make him emotionally tipped over, and to just have that last laugh. And no matter what, the Man in Black does get his last laugh. It doesn't matter. Even if you win against this man, he's done so much damage to you that he's just gonna smile, laughing away as you burn his fucking corpse. Because no matter what you did, no matter how you did it, he's donezo. You're donezo, because you just fell into his trap. Even if you got him, you just fell into his many traps, and he doesn't care if he loses in the end. As long as he gets to see you tipped over, crying, and angry, he's won. And I feel like that's the best part about the book, because the Man in Black definitely has the best personality out of everyone. And I think that's another one of the saving graces that this book has. Now, one last thing before I conclude this. There's a bunch of connections that this book, after Stephen King has finished writing the last 2 novels, he went back to this first novel so that he can rewrite some segments, so that way it could fit into the rest of the story. But those connections don't really add much. He does mention a later villain once or twice in the book, and it just kind of feels dropped off. It just feels kind of weird, because this book is definitely not a book. It's multiple short stories that were published separately, continuing a storyline, but now are all bunched up together. This book does feel like an episodic adventure, and that's not really all that bad, but at the same time, it doesn't feel complete. So the connections that King tried to make within this book to the rest of the series are there, but they don't feel right, and they're dropped into places just to say, hey, other books exist. Just saying, the other books exist, just saying. Anyway, overall, with these criticisms, I do believe that the book could have done something truly amazing. Fortunately, the sequels do just that, so I'm grateful. Seriously, Drawing of the Three is 2 rides and a half, and it is weird. But the Gunslinger has its problems with its characters, writing, and overall dialogue. But it is a series that I felt it had potential when I first read it, and I was right. So, would I recommend this book? Yes. I would. There's a lot of fun that you can have with this book. There's a lot of character moments that do pop up, and the dynamic between Jake and Roland, while a little bit weak, can make you feel something towards the book, and a certain segment in the book may make your heart wrench a little bit. And the adventure itself is pretty nice, and the imagery and the vivid descriptions of each character and land can kind of keep you going on. And the story definitely has something more to it, especially the ending when it tries to go fucking universal shit, and you just go crazy. But besides all that, would I recommend this book? Yes, like I said, but I would do so with a word of warning. You would have, with this book, you kind of have to dig through the mud to find the gold. And while this book isn't the muddiest thing in the world, it's a nice trail to a bigger story. Now, thank you for listening, guys. That was my review of The Gunslinger. I read this with an audiobook and on the Kindle Fire. It was a nice time. This is my second review, more scripted, as you could probably tell, not 30 minutes long. But what I do have to say is this: read the Dark Tower series. Push through that first book. You will definitely enjoy the rest. The first book does have its pluses, but I feel overall like the rest of the series kind of pushes the whole series into overdrive, and you just get the better adventure that the Gunslinger tries to do a little bit. And the character works, and the dialogue and everything else is magnified by 100. Everything is so much better after this first book. It's literally like, I cannot tell you how much this first book is just separate short stories that was one continuous story, but they all feel disjointed, and you can't really fix that. So I would rather call this Gunslinger story a prologue, and Drawing of the Three, which is Dark Tower 2, Part 1. You know. Anyways, if you agreed with my review, go ahead and leave a comment, leave a like, and subscribe to this thing. It'll help me out a lot. I'm just starting out this adventure, so I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope everyone has a fabulous week. Toodles!